In this video, we're going to learn how to Kitchener the toe shut on a cuff down sock. When you're finished cranking your sock, cut off about a 1-yard tail of sock yarn and tuck that into the cylinder before switching to your waste yarn. It's easiest to make sure you catch the corner stitches if you first mark them while the sock is still on the machine. You want to mark the last 2 sock yarn stitches on the needles on either side of the main mark and the 2 needles on either side of the halfway mark. Once the sock is off the machine, start by turning it inside out. So I'm going to show you how to Kitchener on this bit of hand knitting because I think it's just a little bit easier to see with the bigger stitches. So the yellow is still our sock yarn, the blue is still our waste yarn, and I have gotten this white piece so that you will be able to see exactly where I'm stitching. And the goal, if we look here, is to sandwich these together so that we are sewing the 2 rows of sock yarn together, and essentially we are replacing the stitches that are the waste yarn. So we are tracing the waste yarn stitches to make the seam across the top of the toe. Okay, here's what it looks like up close as you get started. You're holding it so that the yarn, the tail yarn that you left to sew in, is coming off kind of the top right as we have it here folded together, and the waste yarn end is tucked down inside. Okay. The first thing we need to do is we need to find the bar that sits in this open space. There's kind of this gap that sits between the 2 sides. And so we want to pick up the bar. I'm going to use this one right here because that'll help close up that hole. Note that if it's the stitch kind of in between the bar and you pick it up, it's just going to make a bigger hole. So you don't want that. You actually want, like, this is a bar, this is a bar. You want one of the bars. Okay. And you're going to hold all this together so that that bar is kind of horizontal. It's a little smudgy here. We're going to say it's this way. Okay. You're just going to go down through that little sidebar. Okay. You do want to pull it pretty tight. You know, not pinchy, crazy tight, but pretty firm. Otherwise, you'll get sort of a ridge. So now you've gone down through that sidebar. We're now going to go up through the stitch that's on the bottom, that has your bottom marker. And then you're also going to go up again through that sidebar. It's a little bit of an awkward angle here. Okay, so I went back up through the bottom stitch and up through that little bar on the side that we picked up. And we can now remove that bottom stitch marker. From here, you're going to go down through the stitch the top stitch marker is attached to, and then also back down through that bottom stitch that we just came up. And now you can remove that top stitch marker. So our yarn's coming here. We need to trace this piece of scrap yarn. So we're going up, and then we're going, you always go back up through the stitch you just came down through. So we just came down through that top stitch into the bottom. Then we trace along the waste yarn, and we're going back up through that top stitch that had the stitch marker. Okay, and then pull that firm. Now we're going to trace around this waste yarn piece down into the next stitch, and we go back into the stitch we just came up through. So that was the second bottom stitch. We just went up through that one. Now we go down through that one. Trace along here, the bottom, and go back up into the top one we just came down from. Keeping this a little looser than normally you would, because I want you to be able to see how the stitches fit together. Again, we trace around where the waist yarn is, back down through the stitch we just left. And you continue like that all the way across. Here I've gone most of the way across, and you could see how it should look. And then I wanted to show you again as we get to this other end. Just continuing here in my pattern until we get to the last couple of stitches. All right, so here I am around to the last bottom stitch. Up. And I can remove that stitch marker. And now I'm ready to go down through the top stitch with the stitch marker, back through the bottom stitch that had the stitch marker. I can remove the top one. So now we've gone through that bottom stitch that had a stitch marker twice. We've gone through the top one time. Okay. From here, we need to find that little sidebar, and it is hard to find at this point. So I usually use, again, you don't want to use this one. It's kind of a smile right here because that will make a hole. You could use either one of these. I think I'm going to use this one. I'm going to go up this way. Let me see, this way. Go up through there, whoops, through there, and then again through that top stitch that I hadn't gone through yet. And then you can go back down through that little sidebar that you grabbed. And then you would weave in, but actually first, I always flip over and make sure that I didn't drop any stitches. Okay. So we now have your waist yarn. You can unravel. Sometimes if you split a stitch like I did right there, you'll have to snip the waist yarn. Be sure not to snip the sock yarn because that's hard to repair. Hopefully you can just pull. You can see it just comes out of all of those stitches. There we go. So that's the seam that we made for our toe. So at that point you could make sure you hadn't dropped any stitches, and you could come back on this side and weave in your final tail yarn following along the path. This is what it would look like if we'd Kitchenered an actual sock with the seam across the top of the toe. I hope that helps. Happy knitting! Visit us at deanandbean.com and please like and subscribe. Thanks for watching.